Mark and Linda seemed like the perfect couple, but behind the polished smiles and quiet suburban home, their marriage was rotting with secrets that would one day erupt into betrayal, rage, and a murder that shocked everyone who thought they knew them. Linda was the kind of woman who attracted attention wherever she went. With her long dark hair, sharp features, and an air of confidence, people often assumed she was deeply satisfied with her life. She had been married to Mark for 10 years, and together they lived in a neat suburban house that reflected stability and comfort. To neighbors, they were the model couple, quiet and respectable, the kind of people who waved politely from their driveway, but never let anyone see too far inside their private world. What outsiders did not know was that the marriage had been running on empty for years. Linda was restless, craving excitement in a way Mark never seemed able to provide. He was loyal and hardworking, but predictable to the point of suffocation. Every day felt like a mirror of the last, and Linda had grown tired of waiting for something new to come along. When Mark suggested a vacation to a tropical resort, Linda pretended to be thrilled. He imagined the trip would bring them closer, help them rebuild intimacy, and remind them of the days when they had been inseparable. Linda had a different thought. To her, the idea of traveling to a faraway paradise meant freedom. She saw an opportunity to step outside the constraints of her quiet suburban life and indulge in desires she had hidden for years. While Mark planned excursions, dinners, and long walks on the beach, Linda was already dreaming of the strangers she would meet, the attention she would soak in, and the thrill of doing something forbidden without the constant eyes of their small community watching her every move. The flight itself reflected the cracks in their relationship. Mark spent most of the journey with headphones on, lost in movies and business reports, while Linda sipped wine and scanned the people around her. She noticed glances from men seated nearby and leaned into them, enjoying the way their eyes lingered. For her, it was intoxicating to feel wanted again, and she fed off the energy of being noticed. By the time the plane landed, she was already detached from the idea of this being a couple's getaway. Mark, unaware of her shifting intentions, remained hopeful that the trip would be a turning point. The resort was everything travel brochures promised: white sand beaches, endless sun, music drifting from beach bars, and a crowd of tourists chasing their own escapes. Linda felt her pulse quicken as soon as they checked in. She could already sense the opportunities waiting for her in the evenings, when the alcohol flowed and inhibitions dissolved. On their first night, Mark took her to a candlelit dinner by the shore, believing romance could be reignited with ambiance. She smiled, laughed, and played the part, but her mind was elsewhere. She scanned the bar behind him, noticing groups of men laughing, drinking, and eyeing the women who passed. She realized she wasn't thinking about repairing her marriage at all. She was thinking about what it would feel like to be with someone new. The next day brought more temptation. Linda wore a swimsuit that turned heads as they lounged by the pool. Mark read a book in the shade, while Linda floated lazily in the water, basking in the attention she knew she was drawing. A group of men nearby began making eye contact with her, and she didn't shy away. Instead, she held their gaze, smiling slightly before turning back to the water. It was a dangerous game, but one she had already decided she wanted to play. Mark remained oblivious, thinking his wife was simply enjoying herself, not realizing she was laying the foundation for something far more destructive than sunburn or hangovers. By the third day, Linda's restlessness became more obvious. She slipped away for hours under the excuse of shopping or spa visits. Mark assumed she needed space and gave it to her, believing she would return refreshed and more engaged. He had no idea that during those absences she was mingling at poolside bars, indulging in conversations laced with suggestive undertones, and letting herself drift further from the vows she had once taken. Each drink loosened her restraint, each laugh with strangers pulled her further into a world she had secretly longed for. She convinced herself she deserved it, that after years of neglecting her own happiness, this was a harmless indulgence. But deep down, she knew she was stepping onto a path she couldn't reverse. The transformation in Linda was subtle but real. She carried herself differently now, with a boldness that hadn't been there when she first arrived. Her eyes lingered on strangers, her walk had a new sway, and she no longer seemed invested in the illusion of a loving wife. Mark noticed her distance but misinterpreted it. He believed she was simply adjusting to vacation mode, shedding stress from work and life at home. He failed to recognize the cracks forming beneath the surface. To him, the resort was a place of renewal. To Linda, it was a playground where rules no longer applied. The nights grew more dangerous. Linda began staying out late, telling Mark she was too tired for another quiet dinner and preferred to relax on her own. He accepted her excuses, often going to bed early, unaware that his wife was slipping into a world of flashing lights, booming music, and strangers who offered her everything he could not. Each night she went further, testing the limits of secrecy, pushing aside thoughts of loyalty and surrendering to impulses she had suppressed for far too long. The vacation that was meant to heal had become a stage for betrayal. What made the situation more perilous was Linda's arrogance. She believed she could control everything, that Mark was too naive to ever suspect, and that she was too clever to get caught. But every secret leaves behind traces, and hers were already beginning to show. A forgotten item of clothing, a lingering scent, a late return to the hotel, each detail added up, even if Mark wasn't ready to see it yet. The walls of deceit were slowly closing in, though Linda was too intoxicated by her new freedom to care. She thought she was untouchable. She thought the resort was a world where her actions had no consequence. But nothing stays hidden forever, and the choices she made on those warm nights by the beach would lead to a downfall she never saw coming. Linda's nights at the resort were growing wilder with each passing day, and her careful mask of being a devoted wife began to slip more often. On the surface, she still played the role of Mark's partner, walking beside him during daylight hours, sitting with him at breakfast, pretending to be interested in the sightseeing plans he carefully arranged. But beneath that fragile image she had drifted far away from him. The resort had given her something she hadn't expected, attention so overwhelming that it fed her hunger for excitement like gasoline on fire. The thrill of being noticed and desired consumed her every thought, and she craved it the way some crave the ocean breeze or strong drinks. At first, Linda thought she could manage both lives, the image of the loving wife in daylight and the secret thrill-seeker by night. But temptation does not stay small. What started as flirtation quickly became a reckless indulgence. Linda began sneaking out of their hotel room under shallow excuses. She would tell Mark she was too tired to join him for an evening walk and that she wanted to rest. Instead, she slipped out after he fell asleep, dressed in outfits that screamed for attention. She found herself in the resort's bars, surrounded by strangers who were eager to offer her everything she claimed she was missing. With music pulsing and drinks flowing, she lost herself in the chaos, no longer worrying about where the line of betrayal began or ended. Every night she pushed the limits further. She told herself she was only chasing fun, that no one would ever know, and that what happened on vacation would stay there. But the resort was not a faceless city where secrets could be buried. People noticed. Staff who saw her slipping into private corners whispered about it. Guests exchanged looks as she reappeared in the mornings with her hair tangled and eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. The secrecy Linda thought she had mastered was beginning to unravel, and the more she indulged, the more careless she became. Mark, though trusting, was not blind. He started to feel the distance. He noticed the way Linda seemed distracted at breakfast, barely listening as he described plans for the day. She stared off into the distance, her mind elsewhere, her body present but her soul unreachable. Her excuses became sloppy. She claimed she had been at the spa but couldn't produce receipts. She said she was shopping yet carried no bags. She came back to the room smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his. Mark tried to rationalize it away, convincing himself she was simply exhausted and trying to enjoy her vacation in her own way. He did not want to believe the alternative, that his wife had found fulfillment in the arms of others. But the walls were closing in, and Linda could not see it. She was blinded by her own arrogance. She believed she had mastered deception, that her husband would never put the pieces together, and that strangers at the resort were irrelevant to her life back home. The truth was far different. Rumors had already spread beyond the shadows. Hotel staff, bartenders, and other vacationers had noticed her nightly disappearances. Some joked about her recklessness. Others shook their heads in disbelief at her boldness. And every laugh, every whispered word, brought her closer to exposure. One evening, Linda grew bolder than ever. She vanished for nearly the entire night, stumbling back to her room just as dawn painted the sky in pale colors. She thought Mark would be asleep, but she was wrong. He had lain awake the whole night, waiting, his mind restless with suspicion. He said nothing when she returned, choosing instead to study her carefully. Her smudged makeup, her clothes wrinkled and misaligned, and the faint smell of alcohol clinging to her were details too glaring to ignore. She slipped into bed beside him, pretending nothing was wrong, but Mark did not close his eyes. Something inside him shifted that morning. For the first time, he began to suspect the truth. As the days passed, Linda's recklessness reached dangerous heights. She stopped hiding entirely, lounging at the pool with men who whispered in her ear and touched her shoulder openly. She convinced herself that Mark was oblivious, too busy reading or too blind to notice. But the looks exchanged between strangers told another story. Other guests pitied Mark, whispering behind his back while he sat alone at dinners or strolled the beach by himself. He was becoming the resort's silent fool, the husband everyone recognized as betrayed yet too trusting to see it. For Linda, the thrill was all that mattered. She no longer cared about whispers or the way her husband's eyes seemed sadder each day. She was consumed by her new world of indulgence. She chased it relentlessly, convinced it would never catch up to her. She thought her marriage, her reputation, and her life back home were shielded from the choices she made under the resort's neon lights and moonlit beaches. But every night added another piece of evidence, another crack in her carefully constructed lies, and another reason for Mark to finally uncover the truth. The danger was no longer just in the whispers or in Mark's growing suspicion. It was in Linda's own inability to stop. She was spiraling deeper with each reckless step, and the more she indulged, the less she could control herself. She had convinced herself she was free, untouchable, and beyond consequence. But secrets never stay buried in the sand, and the waves of her betrayal were already rolling toward a breaking point. Mark's breaking point came suddenly, but the truth had been building inside him for days. At first, he clung to denial, forcing himself to believe that Linda's odd behavior was nothing more than exhaustion or stress. He convinced himself that a vacation might make people act differently, that she just needed space to unwind, but the cracks were becoming too large to ignore. He saw the stains of makeup that didn't wash away with sleep. He noticed the missed hours in the middle of the night when she wasn't tea in their room. He felt the weight of the stares from other vacationers, the way staff grew quiet when he entered a room. Slowly, a dreadful realization grew inside him. His wife was living a secret life in front of him, and everyone else could see it but him. The confirmation came one humid night when Mark couldn't silence the thoughts spinning through his head. Linda had excused herself early, claiming she had a headache and needed to rest. Mark pretended to accept her explanation, but something in her tone gnawed at him. He waited until she thought he had drifted off, then rose quietly from the bed and slipped into the shadows. He followed her through winding resort pathways, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and rage. He didn't know what he expected to find, but what he saw shattered him. Linda wasn't just sneaking off for a quiet drink or a solitary walk along the beach. She was in the company of strangers, men who surrounded her with laughter and hands that lingered far too long. She moved among them with ease, her smile brighter than it had been in years, her body language making it clear she was not his wife in those moments but someone entirely different. Mark watched from the distance, his stomach twisting with nausea as she disappeared into the night with them. Every doubt he had tried to silence became undeniable truth. His wife wasn't simply restless or unhappy, she was betraying him in the most public and humiliating way possible. Mark stumbled back to the room, his chest burning with anger and humiliation. The weight of betrayal was crushing, but what made it worse was the cruel knowledge that others knew before he did. To them, he was the gullible husband being mocked behind his back. A man so blinded by love he didn't see the truth that was plain to everyone else. He felt exposed, stripped of dignity, and powerless to stop the whispering laughter that seemed to echo through the resort walls. The man who had once prided himself on being steady and composed now felt like a fool living inside a cruel joke. For the next 2 days, Mark became a silent observer. He followed Linda's movements without her knowledge, and with each discovery, his anger grew. He watched her brush off his attempts at closeness, choosing instead to wander off under thin excuses. He saw her linger with strangers in broad daylight, laughing in ways she never laughed with him anymore. The woman he had trusted for a decade seemed like a stranger, someone who thrived on deception and lived for the thrill of danger. Mark tried to imagine confronting her, demanding the truth, but each time he felt the words rise in his throat, his rage silenced them. He feared what he might do if he spoke. The betrayal became unbearable when Mark overheard two resort employees joking casually about his wife. He had been passing by when he caught fragments of their conversation snickers about how the husband still hasn't figured it out and how she doesn't even try to hide it anymore. The words hit him harder than any physical blow could. He realized he was no longer just a betrayed man. He was entertainment for strangers. His humiliation wasn't private. It was the subject of gossip, a spectacle unfolding for others to watch. His hands shook, and a bitter fury rose inside him that he could no longer contain. Mark withdrew from Linda completely, but she didn't notice. She was too consumed by her secret indulgences, too busy chasing the thrill of her reckless nights, to see her husband silence for what it was, a storm building toward something inevitable. He watched her every move, memorizing the details of her betrayal, each one carving deeper into his mind. He began to feel as if he were two people, the quiet, polite man who nodded at strangers by day, and the silent, brooding figure consumed by violent thoughts at night. The second man was winning. What tore at Mark most was not just that Linda betrayed him, but the cruel contrast between what could have been and what was. Only days earlier he had been planning a surprise for her, an intimate evening on the beach with a private dinner he had arranged with the resort staff. He had wanted to show her that love could still exist between them, that their marriage was worth saving. Now those plans felt like mockery, reminders of his own foolishness. He could not reconcile the image of the woman he once adored with the one he now followed through the shadows, laughing with strangers and slipping away into the darkness as though he didn't exist. The more Mark thought about it, the darker his thoughts became. He felt as though something inside him had snapped, like a fragile thread finally breaking after being pulled too tight for too long. He told himself that if he ignored it, if he simply waited for the vacation to end, things could go back to normal. But he knew that was a lie. There was no normal anymore. Even if they returned home, the memory of her betrayal would follow him like a shadow he could never escape. The whispers would grow louder in his mind, the humiliation too heavy to bear. He couldn't live with it, and he couldn't forgive her. Mark's anger began to transform into something dangerous. He stopped imagining conversations and started imagining endings. He thought about justice, about how betrayal should have consequences. He pictured himself confronting her in public, exposing her to the same humiliation she had inflicted on him. But those images quickly grew darker, replaced by visions of silencing her betrayal forever. He no longer wanted to argue or demand apologies, he wanted retribution. The thought both terrified and empowered him. As night fell again, Mark sat alone in the hotel room, staring at the door Linda had walked through hours earlier. His hands clenched into fists as he listened to the sounds of the night outside, the distant laughter, the thumping music, the waves crashing on the shore. He felt trapped, cornered by emotions he could no longer control. The man who had once been patient and forgiving was gone. In his place stood someone hardened by betrayal, consumed by rage, and capable of doing what once would have been unthinkable. Linda had played with fire, believing she was untouchable. But Mark was no longer willing to stand in the shadows. He was ready to make her face the cost of her choices. Mark's rage did not erupt in an instant. It simmered slowly, like a pot left to boil too long, steam building until the lid rattled. For days he had carried the weight of betrayal inside him, telling himself that perhaps he could find the strength to confront Linda with words rather than actions. But each time he saw her laughing with strangers, each time he overheard whispers or caught the pitying looks of other guests, the possibility of calm resolution grew smaller. It was not simply that Linda had betrayed him, it was that she had done it so openly, with no care for his dignity, no thought for the man she had once promised to love. The thought of returning home to face neighbors, friends, and family with the knowledge of what she had done was unbearable. Mark could not live with that shame. His thoughts turned darker, sharper, fueled by sleepless nights and a constant loop of her betrayals replaying in his mind. On the fourth night of his silent torment, Mark made his decision. He would not let Linda walk away unpunished. He convinced himself that justice was no longer something the world could deliver, that it rested solely in his hands. With that conviction, he began to prepare. The resort was a paradise for tourists, but beneath its glossy exterior were shadows where rules bent easily. Mark had learned from overheard conversations that there were ways to get anything if one knew whom to ask. Quietly, cautiously, he approached a contact who catered to guests seeking what the resort officially forbade. A transaction was made, and by the time he returned to his room, Mark carried with him the instrument of his final plan. Hidden away in his luggage was a weapon that had no place in a vacation setting but felt, to him, like the only path to reclaim his pride. The following day, Mark moved like a ghost. He followed Linda at a distance, his eyes cold, memorizing her routine. He watched her slip into bars, saw her vanish into crowds of strangers, and noted the careless way she brushed off his presence. She had no idea the storm building in his mind. No clue that her every move was being studied with deadly intent. That evening she claimed once again to be too tired for dinner. Mark nodded, letting her think she had fooled him. Hours later, as she left the room in a dress meant to draw attention, he waited a few moments before following. His steps were silent, his breathing controlled, his heart pounding not from doubt but from grim determination. The path she took was familiar now. She moved through the resort grounds with practiced ease, heading toward the beach where music drifted from nearby bars. Mark stayed far enough behind to remain unseen, blending into the shadows. He saw her laughing as she joined a group, drinks already in hand, her carefree behavior a knife twisting deeper into his chest. But tonight he did not retreat. Tonight, he followed her as she slipped away with one of them, heading toward the darker stretch of shoreline where the noise of the crowd faded beneath the roar of the waves. The beach at night was beautiful but unforgiving. The moon cast a pale glow over the sand, and the ocean surged endlessly, swallowing any sound that dared to rise above a whisper. Linda walked ahead, distracted and unaware. Mark closed the distance, each step deliberate. His hand tightened around the weapon concealed beneath his jacket, his mind repeating the justifications that had carried him this far. She had mocked him, humiliated him, stripped him of dignity. Every smile she gave to strangers, every careless lie had brought him here. He could not allow her to return home as if nothing had happened. He could not bear the thought of being the fool forever. When the moment came, it unfolded in silence. Linda turned slightly as if sensing she was not alone, but she had no time to react. Mark struck with the force of every bottled-up emotion, every sleepless night, every whisper of humiliation. The act was violent, swift, and irreversible. Linda's body crumpled into the sand, the moonlight casting her shadow long and thin against the shore. The ocean roared indifferently, carrying the sound away. Mark stood over her, chest heaving, his mind blank. For a long moment he simply stared at what he had done, unable to reconcile the woman he had once loved with the lifeless figure before him. The world around him was eerily calm. The waves lapped at the shore, the palm trees swayed in the breeze, and the resort lights twinkled faintly in the distance. To anyone else, it was paradise. To Mark, it was now a crime scene. He dropped to his knees, his hands trembling, the reality of his actions finally breaking through the fog of rage. There was no going back. Linda would never laugh again, never lie again, never look at him with that dismissive indifference that had cut him so deeply. But the victory he imagined did not feel like triumph. It felt like an endless void opening beneath him. Still, there was no time for reflection. Mark knew the discovery would come quickly. A body on a beach could not remain hidden long, not with tourists wandering at all hours and resort staff patrolling the grounds. He dragged Linda's body further toward the shoreline, hoping the tide might carry it out, but the attempt was clumsy and futile. His fingerprints, his presence, his very existence tied him to the scene. Panic clawed at him as he stumbled back toward the resort, but it was too late. The act was done, and the truth could not be erased. Mark returned to the room and sat in darkness, his hands stained by more than sand. He waited, listening for sounds of alarm, for the moment when paradise would fracture into chaos. Hours passed like minutes, and when dawn broke, his heart sank at the sound of gasps and shouts drifting up from the beach. Linda's body had been found. In those final moments before the knock came at his door, Mark realized that betrayal had consumed more than just his wife's loyalty. It had devoured him as well, turning a husband into a murderer, a vacation into a tragedy, and a man into a monster who could never return to the life he once knew. The discovery of Linda's body shattered the illusion of paradise the resort tried to sell. Tourists who had come for rest and luxury were instead greeted with yellow tape, police cars, and whispers that spread like wildfire. The beach that had been filled with laughter just hours earlier was now crowded with investigators combing through the sand for evidence. Vacationers stood in small clusters, pointing, speculating, exchanging rumors about what had happened. Some claimed it must have been an accident, others whispered about robbery. But beneath every theory lay the same dark fascination: someone's life had ended violently, and it had happened in the very place they had come to escape reality. The authorities wasted no time. A body on a tourist beach could not be ignored, not with international guests and reputations on the line. Linda's death was immediately classified as suspicious, and investigators began retracing her final hours. Witnesses were plentiful. Staff members remembered seeing her late at night, leaving bars in the company of strangers. Guests had noticed her behavior too, the way she seemed detached from her husband and deeply entangled with other men. Each account added layers to the growing picture of a woman living recklessly on borrowed time. Mark tried to keep himself composed, but it was impossible to mask the turmoil inside him. When the police approached him, asking routine questions, his answers trembled with inconsistencies. He claimed he had been asleep when Linda disappeared, but when asked why he hadn't reported her missing, he stumbled. His body language betrayed him, eyes darting, hands shaking, voice cracking under pressure. The officers saw it instantly. A grieving husband often carried confusion and sadness, but Mark radiated guilt. The investigators marked him as a prime suspect within hours. The walls closed in quickly. Forensics confirmed signs of struggle, and traces on Linda's body suggested she had not been alone in her final moments. Surveillance cameras around the resort added more damning evidence. Though the beachfront was dimly lit, footage caught the shadowy outline of a man following her that night. The height, the build, the clothing, it all matched Mark. Hotel employees further sealed his fate, recalling arguments they had overheard and describing the tension that had become obvious between him and Linda. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together, and every piece pointed to him. Mark tried to deny it at first. He told investigators he loved his wife, that he would never harm her. But beneath the interrogation lights, denial cracked into despair. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him, and soon the lies collapsed. His confession spilled out in fragments: rage, betrayal, humiliation. He spoke of how he had watched her slip away night after night, how he had overheard the laughter of others mocking him, how he could not bear to return home with the shame of being everyone's fool. His voice shook as he admitted the act, describing how he had followed her to the beach, how the anger took control, and how, in a moment of blind fury, he ended the life of the woman he once thought he could never live without. The confession spread through the resort as quickly as the crime itself. Guests were stunned, though many admitted they weren't surprised. They had seen the signs, felt the tension, whispered about the scandal even before the tragedy unfolded. For them, it became a story to carry home, a tale of a paradise turned nightmare. For Mark, it became the end of his life as he knew it. The trial was swift, fueled by international attention. Media outlets seized the story: an American couple traveling abroad, the wife's reckless infidelity, the husband's violent revenge. Headlines painted Linda as both victim and instigator, fueling debates about morality, betrayal, and justice. Some sympathized with Mark, arguing that betrayal could drive any man to madness. Others condemned him entirely, insisting that nothing justified the brutality of murder. In court, the facts were laid bare, stripped of rumor and speculation. The jury heard of Linda's reckless choices, but they also heard of Mark's cold decision to purchase a weapon and his calculated choice to follow her. Passion may have ignited his fury, but preparation revealed intent. When the verdict was read, Mark sat motionless, his face drained of emotion, guilty. The sentence was life in prison, with no chance of parole for decades. The judge's words were final, echoing in the silent courtroom as Mark stared ahead, refusing to meet the eyes of those around him. For him, freedom was gone, replaced by steel bars and the endless replay of that night on the beach. For Linda, there was no chance at redemption. Her pursuit of thrill had ended in the sand, leaving behind nothing but scandal and tragedy. Back home, their suburban neighborhood struggled to reconcile the couple they thought they knew with the headlines splashed across their screens. Neighbors who had once admired their quiet life now whispered about the secrets hidden behind closed doors. Some blamed Linda for straying so recklessly, while others blamed Mark for letting his rage consume him. Their home became a symbol of shattered illusions, the place where the image of perfection had crumbled into something dark and irreparable. In prison, Mark lived out his days in solitude. The man who once believed he was invisible in his humiliation was now exposed for all the world to see. Each night, he replayed the choices that had led him there, the moment he followed her, the moment he struck, the moment he crossed the line from victim to perpetrator. His punishment was not just confinement, but the endless burden of knowing that his actions had destroyed not only Linda, but himself as well. The resort never fully recovered either. Though it continued to attract guests, the memory of the murder lingered like a stain that could not be washed away. Staff who had witnessed the scandal eventually moved on, but they carried the story with them, sharing it in whispers with future tourists who asked about the infamous night. For some, it became a cautionary tale about betrayal and rage. For others, it was a reminder that even in paradise, darkness could rise without warning. In the end, what was meant to be a vacation of healing became one of the most shocking tragedies imaginable. A wife who chased thrills, a husband who let betrayal consume him, and a love that had rotted from the inside out. The story was retold again and again, not as a tale of romance or adventure, but as a grim reminder of how quickly trust can unravel and how dangerous it can be when love turns to rage.